Cyberpunk 2077 is a game full of amazing and emotionally impactful side stories and character quests, whether that be finally opening up to Johnny Silverhand at the oil fields, watching Judy cry over Evelyn in the bathtub, or staring at Panam work on a car for moral support. And it's because of these exact quests that I always felt the game was so amazing, even from day one when most people lamented it for the bugs. However, despite all of the fascinating quests that focus solely on the side characters and their harrowing and tragic lives, the one that might have stuck with me the most was actually a story about a boy that you never even get to formally talk to, who has suffered one of the most horrifying and tragic things I've ever seen in a video game. Nicknamed The Hunt, this quest takes place shortly after you've gotten partway through the I Fought the Law questline, another personal favorite that tasks you with helping the Perales family with an insane spying situation they're dealing with in their own home. And during that questline, you meet with a man named River Ward, who is a cop who's been hired by the Perales family to assist them with an ongoing investigation. But if you befriend him during your detective work, he will call you again later in the game asking you for assistance, stressing you'll need to meet in person to discuss. When you arrive, he shows you a video from police scanners of Anthony Harris, the so-called Peter Pan serial killer finally being caught after having been pulled over in his car on the street for unrelated reasons. In the video, the serial killer Anthony tries to run away from the NCPD, but is shot mid-stride, forcing him onto the ground and into a comatose state. But for River, the even more haunting revelation from the video is a victim in the passenger seat that falls out mid-encounter. And this mysterious child just so happens to be wearing River's little nephew, Randy's shoes, a boy who recently went missing from his home that River has been doing everything he can to solve. And while the dead body in this serial killer's car certainly wasn't Randy based on his build, it strongly indicates that the poor little kid might have gotten caught up in something really heinous. So River begs you to help him on the case, and you both head over to the precinct for clues, where you discover that in his comatose state, Anthony Harris has not been dreaming, meaning you won't be able to use any brain dance technology to try and experience his thoughts. In order to try and jolt his memory back awake, you and River head back to the home of his nephew and his sister, and here you have to confront the boy's mother in her time of grieving and hear stories about Randy as he grew up, all while looking for clues all around the home that might give you a way to turn Anthony's brain back on once again. One of the most sinister things you can find here if you're able to hack into Randy's computer using your intelligence skill is tons of messages between Randy and Anthony, along with a Natalie on darknet and hidden sites, which show how Anthony was able to slowly groom and trick this helpless young child into thinking he was his friend, with many messages where Anthony acts sad and helpless and tries to confide in innocent Randy. Luckily though, if you manage to find enough evidence, you can return to the police precinct and jolt Anthony's brainwaves alive again, after which he begins to dream. So against standard protocol and with the help of another member on the force, you're able to view Anthony's dreams as a brain dance, where you are met with visions of his childhood. As a young boy, Anthony was mercilessly made fun of by students and teachers alike, and you get to experience firsthand the physical and mental torture he had to go through in and outside of the classroom. And it's here we also find out that as a young boy, Anthony started to act out by killing small animals and using chemicals he must have gotten from home. Following this, you find yourself in another dream, this time in Anthony's home as a child, where his abusive father mistreats him and the livestock alike, including a cow that he is injecting with serums to kill, all in a massive barn that is presumably Anthony's childhood home, and likely where he found his affinity to work with and kill animals. You watch as day in and day out, Anthony is subjected to abuse and aggression non-stop, while surrounded by animals being tortured against their wills. And as if it couldn't get any worse, we finally are transported into Anthony's last dream, this time from a much more recent period where we once again find Anthony in his childhood home and barn, but this time as an adult. Standing up from his chair to the backdrop of ominous sounds and squeals, we watch as Anthony steps out of his office and into the main bay of the barn, and off in the distance we can see something moving. As Anthony approaches, it becomes more and more clear that this something is a human being, a large man crawling and bleeding out against the floor, trying to escape and moaning for help. But instead of finding salvation, he is rather met by Anthony reaching over him and overpowering his drugged out soul. Before you can even fully contemplate all the horrors you've just seen, River will deduce with the clues he's seen from the brain dance the location in the dreams is a nearby farm called Edgewood. So you run to your cars and speed over and find a massive plot of land filled to the brim with mines and automated turrets as defense. But regardless of whether you go in guns blazing or sneaking and hacking your way through everything, the most horrifying part of the entire quest rears its ugly head here. Inside the barn, you find multiple dead bodies, all attached to massive animal machines used to inject cows with copious amounts of drugs, and these prisoners are all tied up and restrained against their will, as these machines pump drugs into and pull the very souls out of their bodies. Frantically, River runs over in search of Randy, and lo and behold, if you've gotten enough evidence and finished things quickly, Randy will still be alive, albeit barely, along with some of the other prisoners as well. More than anything though, the reason that this is the most captivating quest in the entire game for me is because of how raw and intense it all is. It's really rare that the game's medium as a whole even tackles subject matter this dark and bleak, let alone by letting us quite literally dive into the minds of the most twisted individuals in our society. And being able to experience that firsthand while terrifying was also such an ensnaring experience, where it was hard to put the controller down at any moment because you simply had to know what was coming next and how it would all pan out. Because it's that exact kind of intensity that makes a quest in a game so memorable, and certainly is the type of story that will last with you even long after you've completed the game. One of my favorite parts about Elden Ring is, ironically considering this video, that it has a huge lack of traditional quests and missions. Map markers and quest givers or objectives are often swapped out for nothing more than a completely free open world where you must venture out on your own and make your own story. But while the structure of its quests are much different than many traditional games, that doesn't mean Elden Ring doesn't have some of the coolest out there. And for me, the one that left the most of a mark was the journey, or in our case, what we will call a quest, of discovering the ancestral spirit of the Chauffeur River for the first time. You see, early on in Elden Ring, you can unlock what are called Sites of Grace, which point the way towards the main objective, often causing run-ins with many difficult main bosses. But besides these obvious pointers, most of the exploring of the world happens naturally, where the greatest adventures and stories are uncovered by simply seeing something off in the distance and deciding to venture towards it. And one of these things you may stumble upon early on is the Chauffeur River well in the Mistwood Forest, which just so happens to be right near where you start the game off in this massive and dense map. Technically, the Chauffeur well can also be reached from a multitude of different ways, but for most players, this will be their first introduction. Deep within the forest is a strange circular building that screams synthetic in an area otherwise characterized by all natural surroundings. And if you approach this foreboding building, you find nothing more than a massive elevator sitting dormant. And should you decide to activate this mechanical beast, you will start slowly descending into the crust of the earth. But instead of being met by only rocks and empty caves, you instead are greeted by one of the most fantastical zones in the entire game, the Chauffeur River. Constellations and stars blanket the ceiling where stalactites should sit, and an ominous mist stands at attention in the distance. Hordes of undead and formidable beasts lurk in the depths of this strange place. More than anything, finding this zone for the first time is so fantastical and breathtaking, but the adventure is only getting started. Because as you go forth into this new underground world, you discover a strange pillar with a brazier attached to it, which you can light up. And if you look out into the distance, you will find a massive dead deer carcass that suddenly alights with life at one point on its massive skeleton. It immediately becomes clear that there are 7 other points on its body missing this heroic light, and it can quickly be deduced that only by lighting more pillars can we bring the beast to life. So you must fight your way through hordes of enemies and the environment itself, all of which is completely new to you, in order to light each brazier, after which you can return to the dead deer's body and uncover one of, if not my single favorite boss in the entire game. Interacting with the corpse transports you into a perplexing, almost dreamlike area even deeper underground, and within this area is a massive sprawling cave that is home to the ancestral spirit of the Chauffeur River. Bombastic yet oddly calming music begins to sweep the scene as the deer awakes from its slumber and begins to glide through the air ready for battle. Blue crystals and stars leak from the deer's hooves, and it stomps on on the ground in an attempt to kill you, swiftly getting ready for another strike. And what follows is perhaps one of the easiest boss fights in the entire game, but also one of my favorites. And that's because everything about this boss, the music, the environment, and most importantly, how you even got here in the first place, shows just how great of a journey or quest it really was. Because sometimes the single best memories of a game are adventures like this, that don't even have a single line of dialogue, but rather focus on giving the player agency to discover things for themselves and a payoff at the end that makes it all worth it. Not everything has to be so rigidly structured, and not every quest and mission in a game has to hold the player's hand the entire way through. Often, it's those journeys that we discover on our own, those stories that we uncover without any help, that will last with us the longest. And it goes to show why this type of game design, the FromSoft formula, has become so popular and beloved, because it takes traditional quest structures and spins them on their head, asking so much from the player, but also giving them back so much in return as well. The Witcher series can be overwhelming at times with the amount of deep, thought-provoking, and dark quests it has, all of which hit such a high bar of writing quality that most other studios couldn't even begin to match. And for the third game especially, this results in countless unforgettable quests, from taking part in a wedding and helping a bearing botchling dynamic duo, to quite literally traveling through time and space between dimensions to worlds unlike anything you've ever seen in pursuit of a great evil. And it's because of this that it can be hard to pick just one legendary quest from the bunch, especially when you include all the fantastic DLCs where truly you can't go wrong with any of the missions. For me though, the one quest in this series that really left its mark was Possession in the Isles of Skellige. You first pick up this quest while speaking with the main ruler in the region, who tells you that his daughter Ceres went off on a quest to become worthy of becoming Skellige's new ruler by helping another Jarl named Uldric, who supposedly is under a curse. So you proceed to travel over massive amounts of land and sea to reach Svorlag, where the Jarl resides. And it's here you stumble upon him and his advisor Hort talking about some extremely peculiar dreams a Jarl is having. You see, the Jarl is very upset and refuses to talk to you, but if you converse with Hort, you can figure out that Ceres could be in a bunch of different places that you must ask around and see, and if you do, you're pointed eventually towards a haunted structure up on a hill overlooking the city. When you go to this house, you will be greeted with disturbing sounds and imagery, but also a passed out Ceres in the middle of the home. And after you drag her outside and get her awake, she tells you she is aiding Uldric by coming to this house to find his family's sword Brockvar, which she believes is the reason the curse is afflicting Uldric in the first place. You see, the sword was originally given to Uldric's younger brother Aki instead of the standard custom of it going to the firstborn. And in rage, Uldric broke sacred Skellige law and questioned the decision openly, after which he was punished for days. Following this, Uldric and Aki were sent to the sea to go fishing and to mend ties with one another. But a massive storm hit and Aki fell overboard while Uldric had his hands full with the sails, or at least that's how the story goes. Many in the town believe it was actually a purposeful killing by Uldric due to his jealousy, but others think it was a mere accident. Either way though, Ceres requests that you take the sword which you find in the haunted house to Aki's body in the sea and return it in order to lift the curse, and while retrieving it from the house, you experience multiple horrifying shadow creatures following you and watching you, but no full-on attacks just yet. Then, when you return to Uldric to tell him of the news, he simply decides to ignore you, after which you set out to the sea in search of Aki. Luckily, he isn't too far off the coast, and when you do find him, all you have to do is fight off some sirens and swim deep underwater to give the sword to him on his dead body, hoping that all should be good now. But as you encroach toward the land again, it becomes obvious that things are anything but good. There's screams and shouting coming from the Jarl's building, and when you go inside, you can find Uldric with one of his eyes poked out and bleeding profusely. And after questioning everyone around him, you quickly discover that the man has done this heinous act to himself. Uldric proclaims that he heard the gods' voices in his head and that they commanded him to poke his eye out, along with many other self-harm acts that were done before this, all under the immense guilt he has felt for his actions. Him deciding not to join you on returning the sword to his lost brother, in this case, is what lost him his eye. And as they are speaking, Geralt immediately pulls Ceres to the side to let her know that this sounds extremely similar to something he studied in the Witcher school, that being hymns, which are shadowy beings beings which latch onto a person's guilt and feed off of it, making the hosts harm and kill themselves for their own pleasure. He instructs Ceres that this can be handled the Witcher way by killing it, or the much more rare and risky way of trying to trick the him at its own game, forcing it to assume a new host with even more guilt than the first. If you decide to use the Witcher way, you simply travel back to the haunted house and engage in all-out warfare with a shadowy being, but if you instead decide to trick the him, things get a lot more crazy. Ceres tells you that she has an idea, and if you agree, she needs you to meet her at the haunted house at a specific time. And when you get there, you wait for a moment, after which she comes rushing in with a baby in her hands, the Jarl's son. She quickly thrusts the baby into your arms and screams at you to throw the baby in a nearby hot oven and lock it shut. Geralt is immediately appalled and freaked out by this notion and has no idea what is going on, but she screams in your face to do it, and a timed cutscene appears with almost no countdown where you have to decide to let the baby live or throw this innocent toddler into a scorching hot oven. And as any good father would, Geralt decides to fling this adolescent being into the oven and lock it shut, right as Uldric and his legion of troops come sprinting up to the house. You have to fight off the enraged men and their leader while the baby screams. And as Uldric approaches the oven with tears in his eyes and rage on his face and screams of asking you why you would do such a horrible thing, Geralt is overcome with an immense feeling of guilt. And right at that moment, the him unravels from its hiding in the shadows and attempts to latch onto Geralt, right as Ceres appears from behind the furnace with Hort holding the baby in perfect and pristine condition. Now unable to latch onto Geralt, who has realized he was tricked and not a real baby killer, is left in the open and free to attack, which Geralt does swiftly. You see, Ceres tricked you knowing it was the only way to get enough real and genuine guilt to lure the him out. And it worked. And after this, you can talk with everyone involved and get some more backstory on the whole ordeal, but overall, this is just such a legendary quest because to me, it's everything The Witcher is all about. Twists and turns you don't expect, dark narratives, and stories that refuse to just be sunshine and rainbows, but rather dive into the most twisted parts of the human condition, all while fighting really interesting and cool monsters. And most of all, it's a quest that you won't be forgetting anytime soon, with a ton of choices and meaningful consequences packed in.